But there's more to the conquest than just Jericho. Spies had reported that Canaan was a beautiful land, flowing with milk and honey. But it was also filled with great fortified cities that had walls reaching up to heaven. One by one, they would fall to Joshua.
The skepticism among archaeologists about the conquest extends to the second site, said to have been defeated by the Israelites, the city of Ai. Here Joshua and his men captured and burned the small fortress after it had initially defeated them. There has been a site traditionally identified as biblical Ai, but the remains at this location show that it wasn't even populated around the time of Pharaoh Ramesses or for many centuries beforehand. During all this time, it was only a demolished and empty ruin, contradicting the Bible's account of events at Ai.
Take the story of the next site, which is mentioned in the book of Joshua, Ai. You know, when we know where Ai is, and when we go to the site, and the site had been excavated twice in the past by big expeditions, there is a major place there from the 3rd millennium BC, but there's nothing there from the late Bronze Age. And the same holds true for other sites which are mentioned in the Conquest narrative. So here archaeology is very instrumental. And here archaeology in this case does provide a clear-cut answer, the sort of yes and no.
We have other sites such as Ha'ai, which is, the name tells us a lot. It's called Ha'ai in the biblical narrative. It's called Etel by the Arabs in Arabic. Both names mean the ruin. Now, the destruction of Ha'ai by Joshua, it says he destroyed somewhere that's called the ruin. So think about it. If you go to a site and you're taking your child there, your grandson, and you're saying, and the kid is saying, Daddy, Grandpa, why is this all destroyed? And you don't really know. But you know that you have the narrative, your historical oral history, your tradition, that your great-great-great-grandfather Joshua came in and did these wonderful things. And of course you tell him Joshua did this. But the story, the name of the site in the Bible means the ruin. So this is how many of the stories perhaps came together into the Bible. They were narratives that explained to the people what happened. Doesn't mean to say they didn't happen, but not as a one act.
By probing deeper, however, I discovered that there was more to this story. Looking for the conquest in the period earlier than the standard view is a promising approach. But in the case of Ai, there may also be another factor at play. There is a real possibility that archaeologists have been looking at the wrong location for Ai. There's 3 cities a lot of times that's mentioned: Jericho, Hatzor, and Ai. What do you know about Ai?
Well, Ai is a very difficult city to talk about in any detail. One problem is that we have no fewer than 3 candidates for the site of Ai. Mm-hmm. Now the classic candidate that most people go for is a place called Et-Tel, which is a problem for any date of the Exodus because it has no Middle Bronze remains or Late Bronze remains. So if Ai was located at Et-Tel, then there's just a gap archaeologically, and we can't tie it up with the biblical account at all. A man called David Livingstone has proposed another site called Khirbet Nisya, where there is some Middle Bronze and possibly early Late Bronze pottery. Unfortunately, at Khirbet Nisya, there's no clear evidence of building remains.
You mentioned that there's 3. What's the third one?
Yes, the other site is a place called Khirbet el Makata. These sites are all quite close to each other. Now, at Makata, an American archaeologist called Bryant Wood has been excavating, and he has a small fortified site there, which could well be Ai. The difficulty I have with Bryant Wood's interpretation is that he puts the destruction of this site at the end of the period called Late Bronze 1. I think it fits a lot better as a site from the end of the Middle Bronze Age, in which case it would fit with the general pattern that I've been arguing for. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'll know exactly when this site ended until all the pottery from Wood's excavations has been independently studied. At the moment we have Wood's assessment of this. I would like to see other pottery experts look at the same pottery at first hand and say when they think this site ended. So there's another possible candidate.
The other problem site we have when it comes to the matter of the conquest is the site of Ai. This was the second city that the Israelites conquered. It's described in Joshua chapter 7 and 8. And with regard to Ai, scholars have decided on the location of Ai as being at Et Tel. This is a large ruin, actually, about 10 miles north of Jerusalem. It's been excavated by several expeditions over the years, and what they have found there is a large early Bronze Age city. This would go back even to the days before Abraham. And then there's a huge gap at Et Tel from the end of the early Bronze period, roughly 2300 BC, all the way down to about 1100 BC, which takes in both the early and the late date. So it doesn't matter which one you might want to hold to. There's no evidence at Et Tel for any kind of a destruction. There was no city there. Well, this has led scholars to conclude, as they did with Jericho, that the biblical story is legendary. It never really happened. It was made up because the evidence from archaeology simply does not line up with what the Bible tells us. Now, in our organization, the Associates for Biblical Research, we don't accept this notion and this interpretation. So we've been doing field work for many years to locate the real site of Ai. I began working at a site called Khirbet el Makader, which is only 1 kilometer, 0.6 of a mile west of Et Tel. I began working there in 1995, and there we have found a small fortress from the time of Joshua that was destroyed by fire that fits all of the biblical evidence.
What type of evidence are you finding?
Well, we have discovered a small fortress there, which dates to the time of Joshua. It's a late Bronze 1 fortress. We have found the gate of that fortress. Actually, half the gate, the other half has been robbed out. They've taken the stones away for building something else, but at least we have half of it. We found 2 lower gate socket stones. These were stones that the pivot of the gate turned in, and we even have an upper socket stone, a very rare find in Israel. And so that was very important because there's no question but what the structure was the gate. Can't be anything else. The gate figures very prominently in Joshua 7 and 8. The gate is very interesting because of its location. We read in Joshua chapter 8, when Joshua brought the army up to Ai, that he camped in front of the city on the north side of the city. Well, that's very indicative of where you would find the gate, because what is the front of a city or a fortress? It's where the entrance is. It's where the gate is. The front of your house is where your front door is. And so, and it's very specifically says on the north side. So we should expect to find the gate of Ai on the north side of the site, and that's exactly where our gate is located, on the north side of the site. Now, we have a lot of geographical information given in Joshua 7 and 8 about Ai, and our site meets all those requirements. It talks about an ambush being placed on the west side of Ai, between Ai and Bethel. We have a very deep valley on the west side. You can't see into that valley from our site or from the site of Bethel, which is a little bit further to the west. There's a series of hills and ridges between that valley and those two places, so it's an excellent site for an ambush. So that fits the story very nicely. We also have two important places mentioned in Joshua 7:2 when Joshua gave instructions to the spies. He said, go up to Ai, which is east of Bethel, near Beth Aven, and those sites are west. Bethel is west of our site, and the other site mentioned there, Beth Aven, is actually across that shallow valley, very close by, in easy view of our site. So everything fits together and matches, and we believe we have found the real site of Ai. It's not at Et Tel, it's at Khirbet el-Makader.
Is it a significant location, or is it, in other words, it's a fortress? Was there a town there? Was a city there? Or does it match the size that the Bible states would have been there? Was it a fortress with people living inside the city?
Our site is quite small. It's maybe 3 acres or so. And that, again, matches the biblical account, because in Joshua chapter 7, Joshua sent spies up to the site. They came back with the report that Joshua did not need to send the whole army. He could send just a small force up there. Of course, they were driven back, but that's indicative of the fact that it was a small place. And then when we get over to Joshua chapter 10, verse 2, it states that Ai was smaller than Gibeon. Well, Gibeon is maybe 8 or 10 acres, something like that. Et Tel, on the other hand, is 27 acres in size. And so it doesn't match the biblical requirements at all. That's just one point. But there's many other points where it doesn't match at all. And so our site is small, as the Bible describes, and it matches really all the biblical requirements, both geographical and archaeological, to be identified as Ai.
If we have the dating wrong, you're not going to find any evidence.
Exactly.
And if you go to the wrong locations, you're not going to find any evidence.
Exactly.
So that's the reason why Norma Franklin and Israel Finkelstein and these others are suggesting that there's nothing that they can synchronize to the conquest.
Yes. Scholars have been, brainwashed, perhaps you might say, with these theories and these conclusions, which are based on errors that have been made by earlier scholars, that have been carried along and accepted and have not been challenged. And that's what we're stuck with today. Bad scholarship and erroneous conclusions that need to be overturned by, in-depth analysis of the data.